Welcome to Identifying Faults and How to Correct Them. In this CPD, we will cover identifying faults, stroke analysis, BLABT, and methods to correct. But before we can correct faults, we need to know how to identify them in our swimmer's technique. Usually, this is through keen observation, but what are we looking at? Sometimes it is obvious if the swimmer is showing major faults, whereas other times faults can be more subtle and go unnoticed. In some cases, the source of the fault can be mistaken or overshadowed by another more obvious fault and overlooked. Understanding what we are looking at and developing the skill of observing our swimmers closely to pinpoint the source of the fault should be a main focus. Stroke analysis is an in-depth study of a swimmer as they swim. It involves breaking down the strokes into components using BLABT, spotting areas for improvement, and making changes to fix any faults. The main aim is to find faults and correct them to help the swimmer move through the water with less resistance and more power. Make sure you check out our stroke analysis resources to help with this in the Atlantis app. But let's look at something familiar to help with this now. BLABT. We know that BLABT is the framework for teaching and improving the 4 competitive swimming strokes. But it is also a great way to analyze a swimmer's skills and strokes to identify faults. First, we look for faults in the body position, then the leg kick, then the arm pull, then breathing technique, before finally observing the overall timing. By observing key points of each component as the swimmer swims full stroke, we will be able to specifically pinpoint both major and minor faults. By observing the components of BLABT in order, we ensure each component is good so that other faults are not built on top. As we explore each component, take note of some of the most common faults we see during observation, which you will see on the screen. But also make sure you check out our additional resources and CPD content on stroke analysis to help. Also consider that you will need to observe your swimmer from different viewpoints to be able to identify the faults. You will see a very different picture when observing from the front, side, and back of your swimmers. Body position. Remember, a good body position is a key element of all strokes and supports the development of all the other components of the stroke, such as the legs, arms, breathing, and timing. If the body position is incorrect, it may slow our swimmer down and waste a lot of energy. It may also look as though the swimmer's kick is poor, and we might blame the ineffective kick on the wrong cause and try to correct the wrong thing. It may be the cause of a swimmer being unable to perform the arm pull with a good technique, or even at all. A poor body position may mean that the swimmer's head is in the wrong position, therefore they are unable to breathe whilst performing the stroke, or may really struggle to achieve the technique. And finally, a poor body position may mean that the swimmer cannot apply the correct timing to the stroke, which in turn affects how effective and efficient the stroke is. Legs. A good leg kick is essential in all strokes and again supports the development of the stroke overall. If the leg kick is weak or ineffective, the swimmer may not have enough propulsion to drive the swimmer forward and balance the body. With a weak leg kick, the arm pull may need to work overtime to compensate for the legs and tiring the swimmer much quicker. A pause in the kick may affect a swimmer's ability to breathe during the stroke, either by not providing enough propulsion when the swimmer takes a breath to keep the swimmer moving forward, or not providing enough propulsion for them to lift the head to breathe. And finally, a slow kick may affect how fast a swimmer travels through the water or how well it supports the overall correct timing of the stroke. Arms. If the arm pull is ineffective, weak, or contains faults, it may not be good enough to support the balance and rotation of the body, maximize propulsion, or provide the lift required to perform the correct breathing technique. The arm pull works in conjunction with the kick to create a balanced stroke. Therefore, if there are faults, timing will be affected. Breathing. If the swimmer is unable to sustain a good breathing technique, then building the distance a swimmer can swim will be a challenge. A good breathing technique minimizes disruptions to body alignment. For example, in front crawl, turning the head just enough to breathe, rather than lifting it, prevents the hips and legs from sinking, reducing drag. Breathing that fits with the stroke rhythm ensures propulsion from the legs and arms. Improper breathing can interrupt the arm pull or leg kick, leading to energy loss and slower speeds. In all strokes on the front, exhaling underwater and timing the breath with the recovery phase of the stroke ensures that forward momentum is maintained. Timing. Faults in timing may result in the swimmer's technique deteriorating across all other components, and developing efficiency and speed will be difficult. A steady kick should be in place to drive the swimmer forward and work in conjunction with the arms and breathing to form the correct sequence of the stroke. From here, the correct rhythm can be developed to ensure efficiency. Effective timing avoids rushed movements, allowing the swimmer to maintain a smooth rhythm. Without this, a swimmer will unlikely be able to develop any kind of efficient timing, as they will rush to get from start to finish. For a more in-depth look at each of the strokes, make sure that you complete the individual stroke analysis and stroke components CPDs. How can we correct these faults? Feedback. Teaching points. Demonstrations. Revisiting progressive practices. Repetition. Positive reinforcement and corrective practices can all be used as corrective methods we should explore further. As we explore these points in more detail, we are going to complete a self-evaluation task. For this task, being honest and objective when you answer the questions will help you break bad habits, build good ones, and reach your goals. Self-evaluation works best when you are honest with yourself. So grab a pen and paper and take some time to consider these questions about when you are teaching. Do you carefully watch to see the faults in your swimmer's technique? This question may seem like a strange one. And most teachers will answer by saying, "Yes, of course I watch my swimmers." But what we would like you to consider is, do you watch but not really see? Some faults will be obvious, especially in new swimmers who make lots of mistakes. But are you carefully watching your swimmers to pick out the smaller faults? The less obvious ones which may be making improving very difficult. The faults that may be having a knock-on effect to other elements of the swimmer's technique. This is where stroke analysis comes in. Do you feel confident in recognizing good technique? This might seem like an odd question, but self-evaluation is key. Ask yourself, how sure are you about what good technique and practice look like? Are you new to teaching and unsure of how certain strokes or skills should be performed? Do you need a refresher on specific skills, strokes, or techniques you haven't taught in a while? Have you checked the expected standards for your swimmers at this stage? As knowing what's reasonable helps avoid setting expectations that are too high or too low. Are you familiar with the common and less obvious faults in particular skills or strokes? A solid understanding of these can make it easier to spot and correct issues, even subtle ones. While none of these challenges are too difficult to overcome, your knowledge directly affects your ability to identify and address faults. Take time to pinpoint areas for improvement and create a plan to grow your skills. Effective observation. How many swimmers are you able to watch at once well enough to analyze their skill and give individual feedback? And does this change depending on the swimmer, practice, class size, and your position inside or outside of the water? We understand that each of the considerations mentioned here can be difficult, but there are strategies that can be applied to help you become more effective in your observations. Things like organizational methods, poolside positioning, and utilizing assistants. Make sure you check out some of our other CPDs to help. Feedback. We know that feedback is one of our main responsibilities as a teacher to guide our swimmers and help them improve. However, do you always give feedback to tell your swimmer what the problem is? Or have you been guilty of looking without seeing or simply not giving the feedback when you have seen it? When giving feedback, how you deliver it matters. Do you point out faults directly to the swimmer or only address the group with general feedback? Do you focus solely on what's wrong without explaining how to fix it? Or do you give clear teaching points and demonstrations to show exactly how to improve? Feedback works best when it's simple, specific, and focused on each swimmer. Everyone's got different things to work on. Instead of just listing mistakes, tell them what they should do and why it matters. Asking questions can also help them remember better. A good visual demo can make a huge difference too. And while praise is great for building confidence, make sure you mix it with clear advice so they keep improving. With straightforward feedback, clear communication, and demonstrations, you'll help fix most issues without overcomplicating. Are you causing the problem? We know this sounds harsh, but this can be so easily done. Teachers can cause themselves problems unintentionally and unknowingly. This usually happens when practice is chosen or used incorrectly and through repetition form bad technique and bad habits. For example, single arm practices. Single arm practices can hinder and cause faults in coordination, timing, rhythm, body position, and kick. Learning to swim involves mastering multiple elements that work together. Single arm drills can add complexity, and whilst single arm drills can be effective for advanced swimmers who have already mastered the basics and need to fine-tune specific aspects, such as arm entry, pull mechanics, or catch. For beginners, however, an emphasis on balance and full stroke coordination is more beneficial. Teaching incorrect techniques can create habits that are hard to break and time-consuming to fix. Faults in technique often stick due to muscle memory, making them even tougher to correct. Starting with good techniques lays a strong foundation for advanced skills, reduces energy waste, and boosts confidence and enjoyment in the water. Swimmers who struggle with faults often feel frustrated, which can hurt their motivation and progress. By focusing on good techniques from the start, you can minimize future corrections and speed up learning. Have you reviewed your teaching practices to ensure they aren't contributing to faults? Do you see anything on screen which may come as a surprise? These may seriously be hindering your swimmer's development and causing faults. For more insights, check out our CPD on coaching practices and drills. Revisiting progressive practices. Sometimes, correcting faults is as simple as revisiting foundational progressive practices. A key skill for swimming teachers is recognizing when a swimmer has reached their current limit. This means spotting when technique begins to deteriorate and stopping the practice before bad habits form from just pushing through. Revisiting easier drills, paired with clear demonstrations and targeted feedback, can be highly effective in addressing faults. It's about reinforcing a strong foundation rather than persisting with practices that are too advanced or counterproductive. Repetition also plays a crucial role in solidifying these improvements. Repetition of practices helps build confidence and good technique by reinforcing skills. Frequent repetition ensures skills are performed consistently, even when conditions vary like depth or distance. Changing the focus keeps practices engaging and prevents boredom, which can lead to disinterest or low motivation. For example, you could repeat the same practice 3 times, but change the focus of the swimmer on each repetition to address multiple faults in the same area. If we use kicking on the front for 10m as our practice. Repetition 1, focus on pointing the toes. Repetition 2, focus on keeping the legs closer together. Repetition 3, focus on fast little kicks. This encourages swimmers to stay attentive during repetition, remain open to learning, and willing to make improvements. We can achieve this by adjusting teaching points to address individual weaknesses and providing specific feedback for individual focus. Remember, you'll need to use differentiation to address multiple faults in different swimmers and use well-thought-out organization methods to stay productive. Positive reinforcement is important when learning to swim because it helps build confidence, reduce fear, and keep learners motivated by celebrating their progress and effort. It encourages good habits and good techniques while creating a supportive environment where swimmers feel safe to try new things. By focusing on what's going well, rather than mistakes, it helps correct faults in a positive way, making swimmers more receptive to feedback without feeling discouraged. This approach prevents frustration, keeps swimmers moving forward, and builds trust between the swimmer and teacher, making the whole experience more enjoyable. In the end, positive reinforcement and repetition helps people learn faster and fix faults. Corrective practices are targeted practices to fix specific faults or weaknesses in a swimmer's technique. Corrective practices focus on improving particular aspects of strokes or skills, ensuring swimmers change to the correct technique. These practices must be suitable to the swimmer's individual needs and current ability. Please be aware, there are not masses of corrective practices or any magic fixes, but let's take a look at an example. The use of corrective practices must be specific to the participant and the fault they are demonstrating. This approach avoids swimmers sustaining bad habits that will still need to be corrected further down the line. For example, a swimmer kicking on their back with knees out of the water as they kick. This is a common fault in new swimmers. This particular fault needs to be corrected to improve the swimmer's propulsion, improve streamlining and reduce resistance acting on the swimmer. To do this, we may get our swimmer to practice kicking on their back and holding a float over their knees. This is a good example of a corrective practice. You can learn more about these in our stroke-specific corrections CPDs. In summary, keen observation is key. Understand what you are looking at and develop the skill of observing your swimmers closely to pinpoint the source of the fault. BLABT is a great way to analyze a swimmer's skills and strokes to identify faults. Revisit progressive practices. Build a solid foundation rather than continue bad practice or using coaching drills that are too advanced. Make sure your choice of practice is specific and meets the needs of the swimmer's corrections. Repetition of progressive practices helps build confidence and good technique. Specific feedback and using demonstrations can go a long way solving the problem. Corrective practices focus on improving particular aspects of strokes or skills to help swimmers correct their technique. But they are not magic. You may need to use a combination of everything we have covered in this CPD to help correct your swimmer's faults, so be patient and try different approaches. One of our biggest responsibilities as a swimming teacher is to correct faults in our swimmers. In every lesson, there will be faults that you need to address, so to help with this, please head over to our stroke-specific corrections CPDs and corrective practice videos in the Atlantis app. Well done! We hope you have enjoyed this CPD. Don't forget to check out our linked content.